Welcome to Her Story, the podcast that brings to life the stories of incredible women throughout history. Each episode uncovers the remarkable lives, achievements, and struggles of women who shaped the world, beyond the textbooks and headlines. Join us as we celebrate their legacies and inspire new generations with tales of courage, resilience, and trailblazing spirit. In today's episode, I will be talking to Carol Ann Lloyd about Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. Carol Ann Lloyd is a historian, speaker, and author with expertise in Shakespeare, 16th century England, women's lives, and leadership. She speaks for Smithsonian Associates, Agecroft Hall, Royal Oak Foundation, and more. She delivers talks globally for Smithsonian Journeys, Queen Mary 2, and more. Carol Ann is the host of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics podcast and the author of The Tudors by Numbers, Courting the Virgin Queen, How to Build Relationships One Conversation at a Time, and Meaningful Conversations. She holds graduate degrees from the University of Virginia and University of Utah and is doing additional postgraduate work with Oxford University. Carol Ann is a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, a member of Innovation Women, and member and past president of the Washington, D.C. chapter of the National Speakers Association. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, Carol Ann. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Me too. I'm so excited to talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine. But first, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, absolutely. So I have been interested in history since I was in the States in elementary school, we call it. So I was about 11 or 12. And my gateway into history was the Tudors, as it is for some people. My mom was watching, we're big PBS fans still in my family, but my mom was watching The Six Wives of Henry VIII with Keith Michelle. And it was the Anne Boleyn episode, and she was standing up to him and standing up to the guards. And I thought, ooh, I need to know more about her. So I became really interested in the women of history and also the time period, and then Shakespeare and that time period and what he was writing about. So that led me into more and more history.
What is it about Eleanor of Aquitaine that you find so interesting?
One of the things I love about her, and I will say I'm always looking for the women's stories because I think those are the ones that are, for me, really exciting. But she, throughout her life in all these different situations, refused to be put in a box and wanted things done her own way. Comes at a cost, but she always seemed to sort of rise to the occasion and embrace what mattered to her. And she had to wait some things out, but ultimately she gets to this place where I think she always wanted to be toward the end of her life. And she's the one calling the shots and making the deals. And she puts a lot of effort into it and, hangs in there until the end. I love that.
Who were Eleanor's parents and when and where was she born?
So she is born in southern France, where we might think of the French Riviera. So she's born at Poitiers in the area of Aquitaine, which is in southern France. And her father is the Duke of Aquitaine. And so he is a great landholder. He is, of course, he is William the 10th. He is the son of William the 9th. And her mother is the daughter of William the 9th's mistress. So her birth and her family, it sort of comes out of the scandal of her grandfather's life, who was sort of celebrated as the first troubadour. He was quite racy, had a risque life, had a very public affair. And so her life sort of starts with a bit, maybe a possible stain of scandal because her parents came together because of her grandfather and his mistress.
What do we know of Eleanor's education? Obviously, records go sometimes missing in medieval history, especially regarding women. Do we know
Yes.
anything about her education?
We do not know a lot about her education. We do know that her father recognized he and his wife did have a son, but the son died young. And so her father recognized that Eleanor may very well grow up to inherit Aquitaine and his lands and his title. And so she was prepared for that by her father. There was a lot of religious education that everybody sort of got at court. She was prepared to sort of run. Most women were prepared to run a household or a great household, especially if you're the child or the daughter of a duke. But she was also prepared by her father a little bit with the possibility that she might, in fact, become the Duchess in her own right.
We know that Eleanor's father died when she's in her early teens. What would happen to Eleanor now that she was a wealthy heiress?
So her father realized that puts her in a really vulnerable position. If he's gone, then the man to protect her is gone. And so he arranged with the French king, Louis VI, whose nickname, sadly, is Louis the Fat. But anyway, he arranged with the French king that Eleanor would become his ward. It's not clear, it's not recorded if her father thought, oh, and the king has a son, maybe they'll get married. He may have thought that, we don't know. But in fact, when the king takes over Eleanor's wardship, he does arrange for Eleanor and all of her land to marry his son and heir, also named Louis. And soon after Eleanor and Louis are married, the king dies. Eleanor's husband becomes king of France, and she becomes queen consort of France. So this happens really quickly after their marriage. They're not even married a year before they end up as king and queen of France. So they're quite unprepared for that role.
What do we know of Eleanor's time as the wife of Louis?
There are a lot of rumors about that. And here's where we sort of look at the records we have. There are very few records about women. We don't even know for sure what year she was born, let alone the date. So one description I heard that I really love is we almost get a glimpse of her out of the corner of our eye as we're reading the records of the men. But we do have a lot of rumors or stories that have sustained themselves over time about Eleanor. So some of those may or may not be true. They're not official, but it seems that the marriage started out. Louis had wanted to be a monk or had wanted to live a religious life. He was actually the second son and became the heir when his brother died. And he was the king and he realized that, but he was very, very, very religious. Eleanor came from this very warm, sort of opulent part of France where pleasure was a priority. And that was certainly not the case with Louis. So there seems to be a little bit of a mismatch in their marriage. However, he seems to have been quite captivated with her, at least early on. But whenever, and he was a young man who was not ready to be king, so he made some mistakes. And she was an easy mark. She was considered a foreigner in a lot of ways in Paris, in the French court, in the royal court. And she was from southern France, a little suspect, her grandfather. So she was an easy mark and was blamed for a lot of what he got wrong early on. But it's not clear that it was really between them, but she is blamed for a lot.
What was Eleanor's role in the Crusades when her and Louis went to the Holy Lands?
Yes, so he was very eager to go on the Crusades, and she was this great landowner. She has all this land. In fact, when she married Louis, it doubled the land holding of the monarchy. So she had more than half of the land. So she was the one that had all the men who could support him and money that could support him in the Crusades. And so, of course, he turned to her for that. And she decided she wanted to go as well. Now, there are legends that she and her ladies dressed as Amazonians and went in full armor. That is very unlikely, but she did accompany him on the Crusades. She went with him. She had her entourage, she had her court, and then she provided a lot of his entourage because, again, she was the one with all the land and all the men who could fight. So she was very important in his being able to go on a crusade.
Did Eleanor and Louis have children in their marriage?
So yes, they had, and I have the dates written down, so I make sure I get them right. Their first daughter was born, so they were married in 1137. Their first daughter, Marie, was born in 1145. So it took a while. Okay, that's fine. They were very young when they were married. And then they went on the crusade. And during their time on the crusade, by then the marriage was very strained. And Eleanor had met up with her uncle, Raymond, on the crusade. She wanted to stay and spend more time with him. Louis wanted to move on. There was a fairly public row over that. So their marriage was on sort of shaky ground. She'd only given him a daughter. So on their way home, they stopped and met with the Pope, and the Pope blessed them to have more children. And so in 1150, she gave birth to another daughter. Now, of course, when you are the queen consort, giving birth to a daughter is not your job. Your job is to give birth to sons. So it sort of looks like maybe Eleanor and Louis are not going to have sons. They've had two daughters, but no sons.
What do you believe was the cause for Eleanor and Louis's rift? Because obviously they ended up getting divorced.
Yes. So officially, it was the lack of sons. I think there was more to it than that. I think she was not happy with, he had started out not giving her a very big role in terms of being the queen consort. And then it got smaller and smaller and smaller. She resisted that. She had been determined to stay with her uncle on the Crusades, and Louis had sort of insisted she go with him. So she was not happy. I think she was very happy to leave. I don't know how he felt, but he knew as king he had to have a son. So that was the official reason that their marriage broke down. And the Pope was very happy to grant them an annulment because they had been married for several years and had not had a son. So,
What did Eleanor receive in her settlement after her annulment?
the main thing was that she got all of her land back. So if you have an annulment, and it had to be really carefully worded because they did have these two daughters, and those were the only children Louis had. So those daughters had to be considered his heirs, even though they were girls, because he couldn't have none. He went on to get married again and have more children. But at the moment, those daughters had to stay in France. So she did not take her children with her when she left the French royalty, but she did take all of her lands back. So once again, because of the annulment, on her own, Eleanor, the Duchess of Aquitaine, was the greatest landowner in France, which made her again very vulnerable. Just like when her father had died, once again, without any male support and an army of royal men around her, now she's no longer a royal. She's very vulnerable as the greatest landowner in France.
So we've gone from she obviously we don't know when she's born, she's an heiress, and she gets married to the King of France, and she's now divorced or annulled the marriage, and she's now a valuable prize again. She's already had an eventful life by the 1150s.
So, yes, this is what's so amazing. She's never willing to say, oh, that's enough. I'll just relax now. She's had a plan. And within 8 weeks of her annulment, she is married to somebody else. Now, we don't know that she was already working on it, but I think it's a reasonable conclusion that 8 weeks is an awfully long time to start and finish a negotiation to marry somebody else. So it may have been that she was working on it earlier, but her choice of her second husband is quite extraordinary as well, because she marries the quite a bit younger, 9 years younger, Henry, Duke of Anjou, the son of the Empress Matilda, who has been fighting for the English throne against Stephen, and Geoffrey of Anjou. So she marries the person who was the heir to the English throne. So her first husband was the heir to the French throne, and her second husband is the heir to the English throne. So it's quite extraordinary that she was able to pull that off. That, again, in 8 weeks, that is a surprising thing to be able to pull off.
Why do you think she wanted to marry Henry?
Well, he was of a similar position as her first husband had been. Um, he was, because he was younger, she may have thought this would be a way that she could have more of a role at court. She was the experienced leader. She had been a consort. She had been in that role. She had been on a crusade. So she had this experience. So I think he was appealing. Also, when your ex is the king of France, you want to have some standing, I think, that will continue to protect you, because Louis, although officially, legally, all of those lands were Eleanor's again, Louis is still claiming to be Duke of Aquitaine. And so Eleanor wants possession and ownership of her land back. And Henry is someone who can help her hang on to that.
Were there any repercussions for Eleanor marrying Henry?
Oh, yes. Louis was appalled, insulted, angry, and in fact, for years. So Louis goes on to have children. Eleanor and Henry have children. And for years, their children also battle for the throne of England and the throne of France. And so this certainly, I mean, there are years and years that France and England are at war. This is not the beginning of it, but this is another key moment where France and England are repeatedly scuffling for a long time. Yes, it definitely has repercussions, and they last for a long time.
When did Eleanor and Henry become the King and Queen of England, and was Eleanor crowned?
Yes. So she and Henry marry in 1152 while he's the heir. The very next year, she gives birth to a son. So this also doesn't look good for Louis, right? It looks like, oh, it's all his fault. She couldn't have sons with him. And then the next year in 1154, they become king and queen of England, and they are crowned together. So she's now been crowned queen consort of France and queen consort of England. So she's gone through this ceremony twice in two different countries. Pretty extraordinary when you think about it.
Especially in the 12th century as well, to go from one powerful nation to another. It's like, oh, okay.
Right. Yes. And often there's still battles going on between those two. So it really is quite extraordinary.
What do we know what Eleanor was like as a queen?
Well, initially, she fulfilled the role that she was given very well. And initially, she and Henry seemed to be a good team. So he helped her maintain control of her lands in France. Now, as King of England, his lands far surpass the French king. So it's good for him, and he's helping her, and he does send troops and helps her protect her lands. So that's good. She gives birth to a son, William, as I mentioned, even before they're crowned. And then the year after they're crowned, she gives birth to her second son. And so, of course, if you're queen consort, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have sons. She is an experienced leader. She knows the French court. So when there are issues between Henry and Louis, she really knows where Louis is coming from. So she's a good person to work with Henry. She becomes popular in the English court because she's fulfilling her roles. And so initially, at least, it's going well. It's really interesting as you look at the children. So her first son is named William. That is very much Eleanor's family name. Her second son is named Henry for his father. And it appears that Henry's plan, although the two of them have built this great empire, that perhaps they're going to separate it, that there's going to be an English inheritance and a French inheritance. Now, that's not recorded exactly like that anywhere, but it seems to be William from Eleanor's family name was going to take the French lands, and young Henry, his father's name, the English name, was going to inherit the English lands. all of this seemed to be exactly what was expected of her. So initially, she's seen as a very successful queen consort, popular at court. She and Henry are a good team. Things go well for quite a while, and she continues to have children. Once you've given the heir, William unfortunately dies young, but she has additional sons. She also has daughters who could be married off. So she is providing a number of children and doing her part. So things do go well for quite a while.
What do we know of Eleanor's relationship with Henry? We know they had quite prolonged absences from each other.
So as her childbearing years came to an end, and John was her final son, he's born in 1166. So for a period of time, she's mainly having children, bringing up children, having another one kind of thing. After John, she and Henry do begin to spend longer and longer periods of time apart. By this time, perhaps the fact that he's 9 years younger is leading him to pursue other women, which he does fairly publicly. She is well established as the consort. It's not like there's any chance he's going to abandon her while she's having his children or anything, but she may have been tired of his having all these affairs. It's not clear. We don't know for sure, but we do see them spending, excuse me, more and more time apart.
Did Eleanor have any involvement in the feud between Henry and Thomas à Becket?
It's hard to say exactly where she stood. We do know that another time later than this problem with Becket, when there's a problem between her sons and Henry, she sides with her sons. We know that young Henry, the now eldest son, was very close to Becket and took Becket's side and that problem with the king and Becket. So Eleanor may have sided with her son against the king with that. We don't see Eleanor playing a big role in that. She has been, some people sort of point a finger at her as stoking that, but I don't see really a big role by her in that, other than she typically stands by her sons. And so she may have supported Henry, young Henry, against the king there.
We see that Eleanor and Henry were separated for nearly 5 years, and she lived in, I'm going to butcher this now, but Poitiers, I can't say it. Do you believe there's a reason for why they lived apart for so long?
You know, it's really interesting because the sort of obvious reason was because, okay, she's not having kids anymore. They're not getting along. And yet he travels with her when she goes into France. He helps her set up that establishment, and she is now there both to keep an eye on her lands, but also she takes Richard with her. So now it seems their son William died, Henry is for England. It seems that Richard was being prepared to take over that land. So she is set up. Richard is there with her. He is the one signing the proclamations with her. He is the one behaving as if he is the Duke of Aquitaine, which is used for the whole region, including Poitou and Poitiers and all that other land. But it is Richard's sort of training ground. And so it may not be as much because of a rift as we might think. On the other hand, they seem perfectly happy to spend 5 years in different countries. You know, Henry comes and goes, they see each other some, but they mainly spend time apart. And also, maybe during this time when her daughter Marie comes and visits her, and we have these legends coming up of courtly love and them holding courts of love, and all of that may have also happened. A lot of historians think that's just a story, but these stories come out of somewhere, I think. So I think we need to take a look. But in any case, there's a lot of time she does spend there with Richard, sort of preparing him to take over that part of their empire.
Do you think it would also be fair to say that in the 12th century that couples were a lot more pragmatic about their roles and their duties, and that even if they did love each other very much, it's, well, I need to do this because this is for our son in France, this is his future. And you need to do this for our son in England because that's his future.
Absolutely. And really, the whole idea, and I'm actually working on a project about courtly love for the higher nobility and the royals, marriage probably wasn't going to be about being in love. Certainly at the beginning, I mean, that 8-week period was not like a wild romantic courtship between Henry and Eleanor. I mean, that was a very political move on both sides for them to get married. And the same thing with the King of France. She didn't even know him before she married him. So marriage was not necessarily supposed to be this loving spend all the time together. You see some examples where it happens. It just sort of happens that they end up falling in love, but it's not common. So yes, it's a very pragmatic thing. Marriage is for certain reasons. She had fulfilled the part of the marriage that required them to be together, which was having children. And now she's back in France. It's really very almost expected in some ways. Yes, very pragmatic.
Do we know what Eleanor's involvement was in her son's revolt against Henry?
So this is really interesting because it seems like it starts with young Henry. Now, it's a tradition in France that the heir to the throne is crowned while the king is still alive to make sure the succession is so obvious no one's going to question it at all. So Henry II of England decides to take this step, and he has his young son, who's often called young Henry, crowned. And this is part of the Becket problem because Becket doesn't do it. So Becket doesn't recognize it. And Henry wants to be crowned by Becket, young Henry. Anyway, it's all part of the Becket problem. But turns out after young Henry is crowned, young Henry begins to think he deserves to have some authority. He should be doing some stuff. And Henry II is not interested in that. So eventually, young Henry, along with his brother Richard, that we've talked about, and a couple of other sons, Geoffrey and John, get together and rebel against their father, sort of saying, we want to have the crown now. Was that Eleanor's idea? We don't know. Did she encourage them to do it? We don't know. Did she support them once they started? Oh, absolutely, yes. So she absolutely supported them in their battle against their father. We don't know that she started it. Some people think she might have, but she absolutely supported them against her father in this series of rebellions to help young Henry take the throne from his father. So she was definitely on their side.
Where did Eleanor spend her imprisonment? Obviously, the revolts didn't go to plan, and she was imprisoned by Henry. What do we know of Eleanor during this time?
Well, it's really interesting because Henry very publicly forgives his sons, which again was pragmatic. They are his heirs. So he kind of has to. So he very publicly forgives his son, all four sons, but he does not forgive Eleanor. So she is in prison. She spends most of her imprisonment at Old Sarum Castle in England. It's in Wiltshire in England. And she is still Queen of England. So we shouldn't think about it like she's at the Tower of London or in a prison like that in any way. She is still kept as the queen. And one of the quite famous movies about Eleanor of Aquitaine is Lion in Winter, which is based on a wonderful play. There's an older movie that Katharine Hepburn was in, and then more recently, Glenn Close playing the part of Eleanor. But the storyline of that movie is that Henry the King allows Eleanor to join the family, come out of prison and join the family for a Christmas court. And it did not happen the way it does in the movie, but there was a time that Henry brought Eleanor out of her prison for a Christmas court. She did sometimes still appear with him as king, but for the most part, although she was well kept, she was completely restricted in her movement and kept away from her lands in France, where she could have had supporters who would rise up and help her. So she was kept in England very carefully and not free for most of that time, sometimes let out for public appearances. Now, it was at this time that Henry did try to end their marriage. There are rumors, one of his primary mistresses at this time, the fair Rosamond, that he is in love with and possibly is planning to marry. He does seem to have asked Eleanor if she will just end the marriage, and she will not. So she refuses to end the marriage. She is still considered the queen, but she is imprisoned for a 16-year period.
Do we know where Eleanor was and what her reaction possibly was when her husband died in 1189?
Yeah, so she was still in prison before Henry the King, her husband Henry II, died. Um, their son, young Henry, or the young king, had gotten sick and died. So he died before his father. And he pleaded with his father to release Eleanor from prison, and his father would not do that. So she was still in prison when Henry II died. And one of his very first actions, official actions as king, because Richard is now the oldest son, Richard becomes king. One of the first things he does is release his mother completely from prison. She is in England when Henry II dies. Richard is not. So she immediately becomes regent for him in England. They had spent all that time together in France. Richard seems to trust his mother completely to stand in for him and really rule for him in England for the biggest part of his reign. She is acting as regent in England.
Do we know some of the the role Eleanor played in England? Obviously, you said she's regent, but how much power did she have while Richard was away?
She really had the power of the throne. She traveled widely. She visited areas that were potentially having a rebellion or might be acting against him. She instituted laws. She represented justice in making sure laws were carried out. She stood for him. She was fully invested with his authority as regent. And she had been Henry's partner for the first part of the reign. So she did know a lot about how to rule England. And so Richard trusted her, and she really did have the authority. And when Richard, he just mainly wanted to be on crusade. He wasn't really interested in being King of England, to tell you the truth. We have this great image of Richard the Lionheart and his statues right there in front of Parliament and all of that. I think that is 100% Eleanor and her promoting his image, because he did not do that much in England. But she stood in for him in his name. She was promoting his rule and was so active and so excited about doing it. I mean, that was really at a time when many people, well, honestly, in those days, many people would be dead in their 60s and 70s, but she is out traveling and ruling and really living her best life during that period of time.
Obviously, Richard died in 1199, 10 years after his ascension. Do we know what Eleanor's reaction was when he died?
She was with him when he died. It was really a freak death. He was accidentally shot. I mean, it was not in battle or anything glorious. An infection set in, and so often in those days it was infection. But in any case, she was quite devastated by his death, and she was with him when he died. Now, when he died, there were two possible heirs. Richard had not had any children. Of course, it was expected he'd live a lot longer. He was a young man when he died. His older brother, Geoffrey, who had died, had a son, Arthur, and technically, Arthur was next in line to the throne. But Arthur's a kid. Richard also has a younger son, John, who's an adult. Richard names John as his successor, and Eleanor supports that decision. So she is advocating for her son rather than her younger grandson. So she's still involved, even as Richard is dying.
Does she help John when he ascends to kingship? Obviously, there's a lot of John is a bad king later on after Eleanor, but does she try and help him when he first becomes king?
She does. Now, she is getting older, and he is a little less close to her, apparently, than Richard, but she does. And she uses her influence to strengthen his claim to the throne In fact, her forces are fighting him because Arthur and his supporters do stage a rebellion to try and get Arthur on the throne. And at one point, Arthur captures Eleanor and her forces, and John brings forces to fight and rescue Eleanor out of captivity. So she is fighting specifically on John's side, and he is supporting her in that. After that period of time, when she's captured, and we're into the early 1200s now, 1201, 1200, she is in her later 70s, and it's about time to retire. So after the capture experience, she feels like John has a hold, and she does retire to Fontevraud in France and enters the nunnery there for her final few years. But she does actively support John in the first years of his reign.
What do we know of Eleanor's time when she's retired? Do we know much at all?
We really don't know much. She has chosen to sort of retreat from public life. Her going to a nunnery, she certainly had enough wealth and influence to live a private life with servants. So she chooses a nunnery, which indicates some sort of religious devotion, perhaps, or maybe that's more pragmatic. We really don't know. But she retires. She goes to France. I think that tells us a little bit about maybe where her heart is. Interestingly, Richard is buried there, and Henry II is buried there. So at that same abbey, that is where she is buried. And John is eventually buried there too. So that is a very much a family place for them. But we don't know a lot. She's just retired from public life.
Do we know when Eleanor died?
So she dies in 1204 at age 80, probably, and that's estimating her, date of birth, perhaps a little older, but anyway, around age 80, which of course today is nothing, but in those days, life expectancy was so much lower, particularly for a woman who'd had 10 children. Childbirth was extremely dangerous. And so to have had that many children, and her children with Henry II were born in a pretty short period of time. So she was pregnant frequently during that time. For her to have lived that long really is extraordinary, given all of the sort of mortality challenges that she faced. And, she was in wars and she was in prison, and that's not necessarily the most healthy thing. But she does outlive everybody, both husbands, unfortunately, most of her children. She really lived a long and active life right up till the end. It's the last couple of years that she retired from public life. So it's pretty extraordinary.
Do we know, can we visit where she is buried today?
So the Abbey is there in Fontevraud. I don't know a lot about its opening hours and how close you might be able to get and visit. So yes, it is an active abbey. I don't know a lot about when it's open or when it's not, or who's allowed. But I will say, if you're interested in seeing the effigies, there are replicas in the Victoria and Albert Museum, right in London. You can see, and it shows how they're placed. She is placed between Henry and Richard as she is at Fontevraud. So it's not a recreation of the entire abbey, but replicas of those effigies and their burial sites are there in the museum. I was really excited when I got to see them. It's they're also, because they've been made more recently, and so their color is great. Whereas, of course, at Fontevraud, it's very faded. So you can really see the great color and the sense of them. And one of the things I love is Eleanor has her head propped up a little bit, and it looks like she's reading a book. And that just really seems like, yeah, she's not just dead. She's reading a book. She's going on and learning more. And that really seems appropriate for her.
What legacy did Eleanor leave, not only in her life, but in the history records today?
Well, I think there are a few things. These ideas and legends of courtly love, and certainly that's something that we see flowering in the Middle Ages, chivalry and courtly love, for its positive and negatives and all of that. her daughter Marie is one of the ones who actually commissioned some of the great tracts on love and courtly love from Chrétien de Troyes, who wrote another version of the Arthurian legend, and Andreas Capellanus, who wrote a treatise on courtly love. So that comes from her and continues. Also, I think one of her great legacies is the legends associated with Richard the Lionheart and those Robin Hood legends where Richard is this great, noble, wonderful king. I think a lot of that is because of Eleanor and how hard she worked to promote his reign and to promote him as a great ruler. Even though he spent so little time in England, he's certainly very famous in England. But I think her greatest legend, at least to me and to a lot of other women that I know, is she was herself. She did not allow the men around her to define her. And even when she was literally put in prison, we see her and her influence through her sons, through Henry, knowing he needs to bring her out of prison sometimes to make a show for the court or whatever. And then her work during the reigns of her children, she just had such an ongoing influence and would not allow others to keep her down. And I think that is her greatest legacy.
Before I let you go, I like to ask my guests 5 fun history questions.
Oh, good.
So, firstly, have you got a historical pet peeve?
Oh, yes. So I think just in general, the way women are treated in history, but particularly the willingness when they are accused of sexual crimes or sexual indiscretions or whatever, people just seem to accept it. And that happens with Eleanor. She's accused of having an affair with her uncle. She's accused of having an affair with Saladin on the Crusades. I mean, all of these just ridiculous. And those stories tend to stick. People are looking for things about women to criticize. And that just irritates me no end.
If you could invite any historical figure to a dinner party, who would it be and why?
Well, I would, there are so many, but I think, see, I'm debating between Eleanor and Anne Boleyn because I just really feel like I want to ask Anne Boleyn, what what was it like? How did you keep Henry? How did you decide to marry him? What really happened? I mean, there's just so much in her story that we don't know. But also Eleanor, and how did you keep your spirits up and stay with it for all those years? So I'd have to break the rule and have them both.
Have you got a favorite historical book?
Yeah, so I have a couple, and of course, I was going to get the titles and the authors just right. But I will talk about just a couple. So one of the ones I've just been reading recently is How to Be a Renaissance Woman. And it is sitting in my dresser in the other room. And so I can't remember the author's name. I'm really embarrassed because I can see it. But it talks about in the time during the Renaissance, when there's a lot of thought about humanism and the identification of the self, and so much of that is male. She looks at what it means to be a Renaissance woman and how women are dressing differently and presenting themselves differently, the evolution of makeup and what that means and those expectations. And it is fascinating. And I am really embarrassed. I will immediately send you the author, and it'll probably come to me as soon as we stop talking. But it's new to me. I just got it, and I am loving it because it looks at something we think we know, humanism and the Renaissance, and says, yeah, okay, we hear a lot about the Renaissance man, but what about a Renaissance woman? And I just love that.
If you could go back in time to any historical event or day, when would it be and why?
I would love to go to the coronation of Elizabeth I because I feel like And one of the things I really sort of focused in on with the Tudors is it's this time where, for the only time, there were two regnant queens in a row, Mary the First and then Elizabeth the First. And if you think about Jane Grey, there could be three in a row. If you think Jane Grey was a queen, she wasn't crowned, but she was declared queen. And to see Elizabeth, after everything she had been through and everything people had tried to throw at her and would continue to try and throw at her, to see that coronation, that moment, it's not the only great moment she had, but that was a great moment. And I think it really changed things to have two women in a row, having been crowned the monarch of England, really set a different trajectory for the monarchy.
That's a good one. That's a really good one, I think.
Yeah.
Have you got a favorite historical fact?
Yeah. Okay. I was just thinking, so I wrote a book called The Tudors by Numbers because I think it's a fun way to look at the Tudors. And 42% of the Tudor reign is under the rule of a woman. And that's the first time in history there had been a crowned female monarch. After, so no dynasties before it had it. After the Tudors, every dynasty, the Stuarts and the Hanoverians and the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, who became the Windsors, after the Tudors, every dynasty had at least one, but the Tudors were the first and they had two. At 42% of that dynasty is under the rule of a woman. I love that.
Thank you so much for coming on today and discussing Eleanor of Aquitaine in such incredible detail.
Well, thank you. I love talking about her. I feel like she was one of these women. When I talk about history and I talk to people, I even have friends who aren't historians, which sometimes I can't believe. But if I say to them, "Have you ever heard of Philip of Hainault?" Nope. Marguerite of Anjou? Nope. Eleanor of Aquitaine? Oh yeah. So a lot of people have heard of her, but they don't quite know why. So I love talking about her and put some information with that name that's so familiar to us. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Her Story. If there's a historical woman who inspires you and you'd like to share her story on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at unholytudor@gmail.com. Until next time, keep celebrating the incredible women who've shaped our world.